Hey everyone, and welcome back to Technology Now, a weekly show from Hewlett Packard Enterprise where we take what's happening in the world and explore how it's changing the way organizations are using technology. We're your hosts, Aubrey Lovell
and Michael Bird. This week, it's part 2 of our dive into cybersecurity and mental health. In last week's episode, we looked at why our health data is particularly vulnerable and of interest to criminals. This week, we're examining how our mental health state affects our ability to be able to make good cybersecurity decisions. We'll be examining how stress affects our decision-making. We'll be asking what we can do to protect ourselves and our organizations. And we'll be taking an honest look at what organizations can do when things do go wrong to protect our mental well-being.
And this is such an important topic. So if you're the kind of person who needs to know why what's going on in the world matters to your organization, this podcast is for you. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to your podcast app of choice so you don't miss out. All right, Michael, it's been a little while since I've been on the podcast. Lots of crazy things going on, but glad to be back and let's get into it.
Let's do it. We've spoken on this podcast in the past about the potential impact of human errors in cybersecurity. According to a study by Stanford University and security company Tessian, almost 90% of employees are responsible for making data errors that could compromise security. And that makes human error the biggest cause of successful cybercrime attempts, ahead of malware infections and ransomware attacks.
Now, according to research from Statista, the average cost of an organizational level cyber attack in 2024 is $4.88 million US, and we've linked to that in the show notes. But the impact goes well beyond the financial aspect. The threat or fallout of an attack can have a profound effect on our health. Now, it's obviously a massive issue. And to find out more, we've been talking once again with Catherine Knibbs, a psychotherapist and specialist in online harms, and co-author of the paper, Cybersecurity, a Critical Priority for Digital Mental Health, published in the journal Frontiers in Digital Health. So there's been a lot of talk over the years about humans being the weak point in our cybersecurity. I'd love to get your overall thoughts on that.
Yes, in the cybersecurity, the data protection, the information security, even my background coming from military and we had personal security and so on. Yeah, the human being is always the weakest link because they are a human being. And what I'm going to say there is that takes me back to many, many years ago when I first went into kind of the IT world. Problem exists between keyboard and chair. That was how we referred to people we now called end users. The language we have about people in this space is that they are lacking something to be that weak link. And generally, that weak link is around stress, trauma, and mental health issues.
And how does that manifest itself?
What generally happens with people is they have lives outside of their work. And what happens to a lot of us is we carry our minds into our work environments, and the kinds of things that happen in our work environment have an effect on our mind. Now, in most of the cybersecurity training spaces, what I tend to see are approaches that follow a behavioural psychology lens. So that might be around providing nudges and prompts and things that remind people to do their work diligently. And there are certainly cybersecurity training services that I see bringing in a little bit of neuroscience and talking about why people might need those pings and prompts and nudges and at what time to use them. However, what I don't see, and I haven't seen yet in this space, is that when we think about the human being, we have to think about what is going on for them the moment they sit down at their computer. So if I give an example, one of the biggest stress-related disorders that we know about in the world of mental health is anxiety. So if I turn up to work and I'm anxious about something, what's actually happening in my body is there's a physiological change that is presenting itself and manifesting as a lack of coherent, regulated thinking. So I might be anxious about, meeting the KPIs of the organisation. Maybe I've been told I've got to get a report in on time, but my anxiety is related to something that happened yesterday. Me and my partner were rowing. The partner said something that I found really kind of hurtful, and I've carried that over into the next day. So I've turned up at work, 9 o'clock in the morning, sitting down at my computer, and the first thing I see is a message from the CEO, make sure your report is in by 11 o'clock this morning. And I think, I haven't done it. And then what happens is an email comes in that's a phishing scam. And it comes in and I think, oh my God, I've got to get that done. So I click over to the link, and this is the issue that presents. Regardless of how much cybersecurity training I've had, regardless of how many pings, prompts and neuroscience-based cybersecurity lessons I have taken, in that moment, I am not thinking. I am stressed, I am under pressure, I'm ruminating over what happened yesterday. There's all of this other stuff going on, and physiologically, I am not in what we call a regulated state. That's a therapy term that's becoming quite well known because of social media. So what I do is in that moment, I click on the phishing link. That would be often how we refer to the human being the weakest link. And of course, in that moment, and it's a fraction of a moment in a bigger picture, in that moment, I am not the same person who took the cybersecurity training. There's so many things that can affect a person's thinking, feeling and doing that what I tend to see in the cybersecurity space is we approach the doing and we kind of meander into the thinking. We have missed the third part of the triangle of a human being, which is feelings. And those feelings have both a physiological and cognitive impact.
So, Catherine, with all of that, what can cybersecurity providers and employers do to minimise that risk and, I guess, help the individual?
There's a lot of pop psychology that takes place in cybersecurity. We approach working with people by saying, well, here's a mindfulness exercise, here's a 5-minute break. What we would be better, and I'm aware that's quite value-laden in terms of the approach, what would be better for human beings is to work in an environment that understands human beings. Now, that's a very, very difficult space to achieve, because if you are an organisation that's based on the numbers of sales you're going to make, it's going to be very difficult to hold that balance between it. And what we tend to do is we bring people into roles and professions based on what their CV said, what their training background is, what qualifications they have. And what we miss is, and what goes on for that person? How do they manage stress? What's their response to a lot of this work? And what we've done is, in this space, we've used a lot of personality testing. And personality testing is not based on feelings, it's not based on trauma, it's based on the presentation of a person in that moment and the way they cognitively approach things and behaviourally approach things. And we don't really have a comprehensive space where, and I'm just thinking, there's a large number of organisations who say they have this. They have spaces where their staff can go and, take a nap during the day, can go and play ping pong. And in those spaces, it's a very different work ethic, probably because they are a highly successful service and organisation with enough money to spend the time to do that. And when you start to look at smaller organisations or medium organisations, it's not how the world runs. But actually, this is a human resources problem that isn't just contained to human resources departments.
Without trying to shift responsibility on the human, is there anything that they can do in that moment to help guide more rational decision-making?
So I am going to give an example here, and it does take me out into a different space. But when was this? 2023. Yeah, 2023. And I've written a blog about this. I was in the NFT space and I made a mistake. I made a mistake based on emotions. So I'm talking the talk and walking the walk and saying, I also did this and I did my due diligence. But because I was excited, because I was in an emotional state, and because I wasn't sitting, for example, at my computer desk, I was on a mobile device and I made a decision that cost me about £500. It was a scam. I was in what they call a rug pull, and I made a mistake. And it's really, I now have and I use this in trading, I've got an image that I say to people, this cost me £500, but actually it's cost me a lot more than that. It's cost me a reflection on, I wasn't thinking, I didn't take a deep breath. And I'm the person who trains in this stuff, and I'm a psychotherapist, and yet here I am. So what I would actually say is, in the moment, we might not catch ourselves. And that's something that businesses really need to comprehend in terms of humans are going to make mistakes. The biggest part that we can do really is often when you think about data breaches or somebody's clicked on a phishing link, is usually it's damage control after it. And that damage control also includes the human, because the first thing, and let me tell you, I went through this myself, the first thing that happens is you turn on yourself. So you have shame, you have anger, you have sadness, you have absolute disappointment in yourself, you are too embarrassed to tell anybody what's happened. It becomes its whole little monster all by itself. And often that's what happens in businesses, is people realise what they've done at the moment that it takes place. And that's when they have an internal crumple. And we need to be able to support our staff, our employees in that moment, because shame is, if you like, out of all the emotions, it's the most debilitating, and it's the one that can lead to further distress.
So as an academic researcher in this area, as well as a practitioner, how much research is going into this field, and what are the findings?
I don't spend a lot of time in the cybersecurity literature looking at people and feelings. What I can tell you is when it comes to the space of certainly cyber-related issues, we tend to do a lot about let's do preventative. This is how to prevent cybersecurity errors. This is how to... And again, I see this in my profession. There's a lot about how to prevent the issues that occur. And yet I'm in an industry which will never go out of fashion, so to speak, because human beings are human beings and they're fallible. And what I tend to see is that even in my profession, there's no discussions about cyber-related harms. It's very, very minimal. So I don't know is a completely truthful answer as to what we're really studying here. And I would also say, and where is the research about how we mitigate the harms afterwards?
Thanks, Catherine. There are some amazing insights in there, and we'll be back with Catherine in just a moment, so don't go anywhere. All right. Well, now it is time for Today I Learned, the part of the show where we take a look at something happening in the world that we think you should know about. Aubrey, I think it's you this week.
That's right. It's one from me this week. And now many of you will have heard of the Turing Test. It was invented by computer pioneer Alan Turing in 1950 and has traditionally been held as a standard of whether a machine is intelligent or not. The idea is that a computer passes the test when a human operator can't tell if they are conversing with a machine or not. Now, until probably a decade ago, that was a reasonable test, but in the last few years, it's been pushed to its limits. We know that generative AI is improving all the time, and so are its conversational skills. What's needed is a new test, and the public is being asked to help format it. An appeal has gone out, supported by AI ethics boards and organizations, to find a new test to put to our AIs, something that will push them to their limits. Being billed as humanity's last exam, the test aims to put difficult visual and advanced reasoning, as well as deep research questions to generative AI systems, in order to test how well they respond and, crucially, track their progress in fields where they've traditionally performed poorly. So, what are they exactly looking for? Questions from people in technical fields, ideally with a PhD, about something that won't show up effectively in search engines. Is that you? We've put a link in the show notes so you can find out more. Will it beat the computer? Well, that's between you and the AI.
Yeah, it certainly is. Anyway, awesome. Thank you for that, Aubrey. And now it is time to return to our guest, Catherine Knibbs, to talk about our digital mental health. So, Catherine, one question I don't think that gets asked is, from a mental health perspective, when there is an attack, how do we mitigate the harms after the fact?
Yeah, so unfortunately, there is often a scapegoat out of the event. And that's usually because somebody is trying to protect their reputation or protect their business assets or protect something around themselves. And again, that's based in human beings being human beings. So for example, if I was running a business and an error that one of my employees made was because they weren't concentrating, they clicked on a phishing link, and that's what they said to me is, sorry, wasn't thinking, and I've just lost £15 million or $15 million, I would be really upset. And that's where emotional regulation comes in for the staff. So often we do the technology, we do the training for don't make a mistake. What I actually see that I suppose it's starting to come into businesses, and how do we have a space where we're all emotionally regulated, we're all capable of taking a step back and taking a breath, which we don't. When something happens and it incurs a cost to us, we tend to be reactive rather than responsive. So I would also say we need training in, okay, your employees might cost you your business, because at the end of the day, that could be the worst case scenario. We have business contingency plans. We have preventative plans. We have standards for how to ensure that these things don't happen. But what I don't see are international standards on, and when it does, this is how we human to human.
So as always, our last question, why should our organizations be concerned about the digital mental health or the mental health and the digital space of their employees and service users?
There's a lot of what's often called hustle porn. Actually, on social media, it's known as hustle porn. There is a lot about helping yourselves and helping your business, and we tend to talk in phrases like optimal performance, optimal functioning as a business, and we look to be the most efficient, the most fluid, and the speediest of businesses. And yet, businesses are run by human beings, and human beings require human connection, and human connection requires all of us to be human. Now, that means, all right, I'm not suggesting that we all do away days here, because that's often the intervention that comes into a lot of workplaces, but self-discovery and self-understanding as a manager, as an employee, as a service delivery, whatever trade or profession it is within the digital space. Actually, we all matter. And I think quite often we feel like we're in a hierarchical society. Of course, we are. But if we can remove some of those boundaries of hierarchy in perception, and we see each other as human beings, we would actually have a more cohesive, self-sustaining, regulated environment. And that is where humans flourish.
Catherine, thank you so much for talking to us. There's a lot to think about in there, and you can find out more on the topics discussed in today's episode in the show notes.
All right, well, we're getting towards the end of the show, which you know what that means. It's time for This Week in History, a look at monumental events in the world of business and technology, which has changed our lives. Michael, what do we have?
Well, Aubrey, the clue last week was it's 1938. Just copy me and you'll be fine. Any guesses? Any ideas?
No ideas for me. I'm curious about this one.
No, I think Alicia and I were struggling as to what that would be. Anyway, it was, of course, the invention of photocopying. Inventor Chester Carlson initially used static electricity, which he created with a handkerchief. He then took a light bulb and dry, light-sensitive powder to make the first copy, which was the date followed by the word Astoria. The technology took a while to take off, though. It wasn't until 1959, more than 20 years later, that the first copier hit the market. The machine weighed 650 pounds, which is nearly 300 kilograms, yeah, and had a reputation for catching fire. But that didn't stop it from becoming an office staple, though. So, Aubrey, what is the clue for next week?
Well, the clue for next week, I'm not sure if it's that crazy, but it's the year 2000 and this home is remote, but the views are worth it. Huh. Do you know what it is?
No, do you?
I don't. I mean, I love the year 2000. We can talk all things year 2000.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We'll have to wait till next week. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of Technology Now for this week. Thank you to our guest, Catherine Knibbs, psychotherapist and specialist in online harms. And to you, our listeners, thank you so much for joining us.
Technology Now is hosted by Aubrey Lovell and myself, Michael Bird, and this episode was produced by Sam Dattapaulin with production support from Harry Morton, Zoe Anderson, Alicia Kempson-Taylor, Alison Paisley, Alyssa Mitri, and Camilla Patel.
Our social editorial team is Rebecca Wissinger, Judy Ann Goldman, Katie Guarino, and our social media designers are Alejandra Garcia, Carlos Alberto Suarez, and Ambar Maldonado.
Technology Now is a Lower Street production for Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and we'll see you the same time, the same place next week. Cheers.